And for the students that come in, it seems like they are buying a lottery ticket, right? Is the gamble worth it for the people who don't make it?
It's a great question. So, I mean, with lottery tickets, of course, the person who loses the lottery is unhappy, right? Because you paid money for a lottery ticket and then you lost the lottery, right? But the question is, are the skills that you invested in with the hope of getting that US job, are those skills valuable even if you don't get that US job, right? So the question is, I went and got a degree in computer science with the prospect of getting a US job. Now, I didn't get the US job, I lost the H-1B lottery. Are my computer science skills still valuable elsewhere, right? Now, they're not as valuable as they would have been in Silicon Valley, right? In Silicon Valley, they're extremely valuable, like those skills. In other parts of the world, they are somewhat valuable, but nothing like what it would be in Silicon Valley, right? So you do get, for a lot of people, they should have, someone who, say, would have been a really good doctor, but did a computer science degree only because he was hoping to win the H-1B lottery and lost the lottery. That's too bad because we lost a pretty good doctor. You know what I mean? Like it might not be great, but that's kind of how the world works, right? Like, growing up, for instance, I did all this cricket coaching, right? I grew up in Calcutta, like everyone around me was doing cricket coaching. Why? Like, you saw cricketers every day on TV. You had this dream, I'm going to be the next like Sachin, and everyone did cricket coaching, right? But none of us became cricketers. None of my friends are cricketers, at least. Like, all of us did all this, But that aspiration is there, right? Because of that aspiration, you invest in that skill, you try, and then you're like, okay, I don't have it, So yeah.
So going back to the universities, right? So before, again, we started off with H1B, but I think that comes very later in the pipeline. So I think you mentioned that, students, when they come to universities, they come with a student visa. My understanding of that is that's an F1 visa.
Yeah.
Let's assume that, now they've graduated. What happens next? I mean, it's for STEM and non-STEM fields. Like, what's the next mission?
Yeah. So the good thing, so in the US, if you have a STEM degree, then even on your F1 visa, you can work, for now up to 3 years, right? So even if you don't get the H-1B, so what happens is every year those students will enter the H-1B lottery, right? So essentially they'll do it for at least a few, they try while they're in the US, so they're still working on the F1 visa, and they could be working for Microsoft, they could be working for Google, they could be working for a startup, whatever it is on that F1 visa, right? You can continue to work if you have a STEM degree. If you don't have a STEM degree, you can still work for 1 year, right? But the important thing about the H-1B lottery is that there is a separate quota for those people who have a US graduate degree, right? So you have a master's degree in computer science from, say, University of Arizona or whatever, you're in a separate quota, which means your chances of winning the H-1B lottery are a lot higher than someone who only got educated in India, right? So that's another reason why it's attractive to get a US degree, because then it becomes, at least the probability of winning that lottery increases essentially.
Again, just to be clear, my understanding is this is applicable only to the master's degree, right? Or is it even to the
what they call graduate degrees in the US? So masters or PhD or any like masters related. Yeah, exactly. So those are what in the US they call them graduate degrees. Yeah.
Understood. What happens to, so we have just spoken about this in terms of the Indian context and, on the Indian students, on the Indian citizens, etc. What is the impact of this on the American students, etc.? What I mean is, let's say there is a PhD advisor and, he can advise at the max, maybe some, 10, 15 students. Again, I'm throwing this number off the top of my head. So is there any impact on migration for the US students per se?
So it's a great question. So in our research, what we find is that actually the revenue that the Indian students bring is what allowed these universities in the US to actually expand and enroll more local students and keep the local tuition rates low. So what they call in-state student tuition rates stayed low. And then the revenue that the Indian students were bringing was then spent on essentially what we call cross-subsidizing the local student. That means you take the revenue from the Indian student and it pays for the education of the American student, right? So it allows you to enroll more American students. And what then they spent that money also on was kind of more instruction, expenditures, more research labs, and so on and so forth. What you see is universities expanded their engineering departments, for instance, right? Now that can be controversial in the U.S. There are schools, there are especially certain state schools, like Michigan State School, which kind of expanded their engineering departments, but kind of contracted their history department and English literature department and stuff like that, because again, they were getting all this revenue. The engineering department was getting all this revenue from Indian students, right? So yes, there is a trade-off in the sense that it shifts kind of what these universities are, what kind of departments they're focusing on. But on net, it's really benefiting the US students because of this cross subsidization. The revenue pays for the local students. It allows the university to spend more on infrastructure, quality, research labs. And then the Indian graduate students become the lab assistants, they become the teaching assistants, and so on and so forth, right? So kind of the entire production changes in that way. So, yeah.